Drake dropped his album For All the Dogs in October. By commercial standards, it was another smash hit. The album sold 402,000 units in its first week and earned him his 13th #1 album. Reviews were kinda mediocre, with Pitchfork giving it a 6.5, which is right in the range of what they've given the other recent Drake efforts. But Metacritic's score of 53 hints that other outlets were maybe a little less hot on Aubrey's latest adventure. With 3 albums in the last year or so, and an exhausting tour, Drake was hinting at taking a long time off after this project. Yeah, he didn't do that. About 5 weeks later, he tacked 6 more songs onto Fat D, with Scary Hours 3 arriving on November 17th. Drake threw these songs onto the original album on DSPs, so it's kinda like a deluxe album of sorts. Before this software update, For All the Dogs checked in at a hefty 23 songs and a runtime of 1 hour and 24 minutes. Now, in its presumably final state, it checks in at 29 songs with a runtime of 1 hour and 48 minutes. Not a lot of people are going to be actively listening to music for almost 2 hours straight, unless you're on a flight or a road trip or something like that. As someone who likes Drake's music, I wasn't even finishing the original For All the Dogs in one sitting. And that's not because of the quality of the music, but like, who's going to sit down and listen to an album for that long? Now that it's basically the length of a movie, it's even less likely I'm going to consume it in one go. This is not a hate on Drake video. In fact, what Drake did is pretty much par for the course for A-list artists in 2023. A data company called Luminate released their top 10 biggest albums of 2023 at the mid-year point. Here they are. Morgan Wallen's One Thing at a Time was at #1. He also checked in with Dangerous at #4. SZA's SOS took the #2 slot. Taylor Swift took #3 with Midnights and #10 with Lover. Metro Boomin had #5 with Heroes and Villains. Bad Bunny had #6 with Un Verano Sin Ti. Drake and 21 Savage's Her Loss took #7. Zach Bryan's American Heartbreak came in at #8. And Karol G's Mañana Será Bonito came in at #9. I put on my math teacher hat, not to be confused with the backwards Yankee hat I wear on YouTube, and I did some analysis of my own. The average track list of those 10 albums contains 22.5 tracks, and the average length is about 1 hour and 15 minutes. Albums are so long now, and today we're going to talk about why. We got to start with a quick history of the album. Actually, we have to start with you liking and subscribing and commenting. So, alright, now that we've done that, we can start with the history of the album. I touched on this in my video about being an old head, but we got to do another refresher. The story of recorded music being sold in stores and purchased by you to bring home to listen on your own starts with the vinyl. The vinyl record was introduced in 1948 with an audio capacity of 21 minutes on each side for a total of 42 minutes. As a result, unless an album was a double disc release, they were all going to be 42 minutes or shorter. People didn't sit down and decide, hey, I think 42 minutes is about how long the perfect album would be. This was just shaped by the technology that they had at the time. But to us, that became the standard. That became the ideal for what listening to an album felt like. Looking at the #1 albums of the year by sales from 1965 to 1979, the average length was about 37 minutes. This is without including some double albums that went #1, like Peter Frampton's live album, Frampton Comes Alive, and the soundtrack to Jesus Christ Superstar. Even still, these double albums had about the same runtime as the top 10 albums from 2023. What used to be seen as a double album or 2 albums for the price of 1, it's now about the amount that someone would expect from a regular A-list release. So this started to change when the cassette tapes supplanted the vinyl in terms of popularity. The cassette had been around since the 1960s, but they became the top-selling format for music in 1985. So we'll use that as a date. The smallest size of cassette tape could fit 30 minutes on each side for a total of 60 minutes, and the largest size could fit 60 minutes on each side for a total of 120 minutes. With this increased capacity, when we look at the top albums from 1985 to 1989, we're expecting them to be a little bit longer, and they were. The average was about 48.5 minutes now. The cassette era was relatively short. The CD, or the compact disc, was introduced in 1983, and it became the main form of music consumption by 1992. A standard disc can hold about 74 minutes of music. The music industry responded by taking advantage of this increased capacity, as the average length of a #1 album from 1993 to 1999 was about 52.5 minutes long. This trend was exacerbated into the 2000s, where for the first decade of this new millennium, the average #1 album of the year, not including soundtracks, was 66.5 minutes long. And subjectively, of course, these albums were not filler. The full version of Usher's Confessions album, which is 77 minutes long, contains 4 #1 singles. Yeah, Burn, Confessions Part 2, and My Boo. While a 5th track, Caught Up, peaked at #8. And if you ask me, it's one of the best R&B albums of all time, quality-wise. And that's business that I'm not afraid to stand on. With the internet changing the way that we consume music, the CD's reign was already waning by the end of the 2000s. I think the last time I went into a store and bought a CD was in 2010, when I bought Big Sean's Finally Famous. Ass, 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 ass. The 2010s were a weird time, with the first half being the real twilight of the physical sales era of music, and the second half being dominated by the music industry trying to figure out how to quantify a sale in a post-retail music world. So when we look at the top-selling albums of the 2010s, not counting soundtracks, the average is about 58.5 minutes long, which is actually a bit shorter than the 2000s. However, Adele, who doesn't do the whole bloated album thing, had 2 of those albums. So if we take Adele out, the average is 62.5 minutes. I love manipulating data to fit my narrative. It's my favorite thing to do. Alright, so we have a full historical context of album length. Let's go back to 2023. These albums in 2023 are basically twice as long as the ones that dominated the 60s and the 70s. Even staying in recent times, popular albums today in 2023 are over 10 minutes longer than they were in the 2010s. What gives? What's up with that? The answer is actually pretty simple. Back in the day, you bought an album, that was a sale, that's it. It's actually a lot more complicated than that in terms of how they determined how many sales there were, but that was the concept. But in the streaming era, individual streams on songs are counted as an album sale. According to the rules made up by the RIAA, 1,500 streams equals 1 album sale. I'm not sure how they quantified that, who came up with that, but that's just the way it is now. So if you put 25 songs on your album and consumer A listens to your album front to back, they generated 25 streams to count towards sales. If your album was only 10 tracks and then consumer B streamed that front to back, they generated 10 streams. Even though both consumers listened to the album front to back, consumer A was worth 2.5 times what consumer B was in terms of sales. Artists who are expected to make some noise on the charts are gonna stack their albums up to increase their chances of going number 1. Why should they care, you might ask? In the current business model, artists are paid per stream now. So while in the past, it wouldn't financially matter if their album was 10 tracks or 15 tracks, a sale was a sale, it actually makes a monetary difference now. So your follow-up question might be, artists get paid dirt for their streaming anyway, they make most of their money on tour or selling merch. Drake is rich as Taylor Swift is rich as why do they need to stack their albums with 50 songs? It's about stats. It's the same way an NBA player cares about being MVP. Going number 1 is, at very least, an incredibly impressive bragging right. But beyond that, it opens doors for brand deals, and in a lot of these artists' recording contracts, there actually could be clauses or incentives built around going number 1. Essentially, because the system is built to reward those who are dropping longer albums, the industry is going to keep pushing for longer albums, unless those rules change. And the unfortunate casualty of all this is the bastardization of the album format. I think the funniest example is Chris Brown, who dropped a 45-track album. That's not the deluxe, by the way. The deluxe was a 57-track Christmas version that came out a little bit later. The regular version of this album had a 2-hour and 38-minute runtime. It's like Killers of the Flower Moon, but just Chris Brown. If this wasn't embarrassing enough, he went on social media and explicitly asked fans to buy the album on iTunes and then not stream the downloaded version, but stream the version on a DSP so that those streams count and leave it on loop while they're sleeping. Not everyone is as shameless as Chris Brown, but the 25 to 30 track album has become the standard. It's not just a hip hop thing or an R&B thing or a pop thing, country singers are doing it too. And for an A-list artist looking to chart, unfortunately they have to play the game. But with that being said, I would make the argument that artists who aren't really pushing for that top 40 dominance should make their projects shorter. A more cohesive project can lead to fans caring more about you. If you're an artist who's not an A-lister, but has fans or wants to stand out, a beloved project is really the best way to do that. 2 of the examples I want to present are Break-Ins and Underscores. Both have gone on tours for their projects in the past year, and those projects are 13 or fewer tracks, as were their previous projects before these. Underscores only has 300,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but if you watch my videos, you know that monthly listeners are a stupid stat. If you don't, go watch that video. But she sold out most of the dates on her tour, including a 650 cap venue in New York and a 250 cap venue in Montreal. The reason why I mentioned Montreal is I went to this artist boot camp put on by Tidal, and they brought in a legendary agent, and she was talking about the business, and she was complaining about how hard it is to sell tickets in Montreal. So when I knew that, and I saw these statistics, and I saw that Underscore sold it out, I was like, damn, that's really impressive. Underscore is selling out a 250 cap venue on her hometown tour, and it's not even her hometown. No pun intended. That's really impressive. Break-Ins on his tour sold out that same 650 cap venue in Brooklyn, and he even had to add a second night there. Last I checked, Break-Ins was hovering around 700,000 monthly listeners, which is a lot, but it's not even a million, right? Anyone who works in music would tell you that the realest way to gauge popularity is hard ticket sales on tour. This has become more common knowledge in recent days, as TikTok has led to these huge meteoric growth periods for young artists, coupled with the pandemic stopping them from performing. And once it was time for them to finally go outside, they realized how hard it is to translate those online followings into sales and fans in the arena. It can be a lot tougher than your follower count or your monthly listener count might imply. Artists like Break-Ins and Underscores have the opposite situation. They're selling out way bigger venues than the industry chuds might expect them to based on their following or their stats. Is this success specifically because their albums are short? No. If you cut your 20-track album of mid to a 12-track album of mid and expect it to gain a huge fan base, I have some horrible news for you. Mid is mid. No matter how long it is, no matter how short it is, it's mid. But one reason why fans love these artists specifically that I picked is because of their attention to detail and the deliberateness of their decisions. And nothing says deliberate like a perfectly culled and organized track list. It exists outside of their genre too. Saba dropped his album Care For Me in 2018, and he was able to tour and do huge festival stages for almost 4 years before he dropped his next album as an independent artist. And speaking personally, that was the album that made me a Saba fan. And one reason for that was I felt like I could listen to the whole thing front to back. If he had added just a couple more songs that didn't really fit the narrative or fit the vibe, I don't know if I would feel that way. At this point, there's even A-list artists who recognize the value of a short project. Jack Harlow dropped his album Jackman this year, and at 10 tracks and 24 minutes total, without a single or any features, its purpose was to satisfy his most dedicated fans after going pop on the last few. He's already back to going pop, according to his most recent single, Lovin' On Me, but that Jackman project resonated with me too. Did it perform commercially? Not as well as his previous album, as it hit 33,000 first week sales, while his album before that, Come Home The Kids Miss You, had 113,000. But also, that album had First Class, Nail Tech, and a Drake feature. And it's hard to call an album a flop when it wasn't designed to go #1. Jackman also got nominated for Album of the Year at the BET Hip Hop Awards, and it still reached the top of Billboard's rap albums chart, even with those lower sales. It did its job. I would call that a success. Even for artists who are playing in that realm of going #1 on their other projects, there is value in dropping some of your projects that are nice and short and sweet to retain that fan base. There's so much going on now, even beyond music, just so many opportunities to be entertained that, like, at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is making people care. And that short project is such a tried and true and tested way of making people care. And because of that, I don't think the album format is going anywhere. I also don't think that album bloating is gonna stop, unless the RIAA changes their rules for some reason. But it's nice to see some artists like Jack Harlow, Saba, Break-Ins, and Underscores still see value in cohesion and brevity. I mean, in my own artist career, none of my albums have been longer than 10 tracks, 20-something minutes. I really think that's the best way to communicate stuff. And I have a lot more music that I could have put on those projects, but I make that decision because as a listener myself, I know that I relate more when I have this short project I can consume front to back, and I want fans to feel that way too. So if you want to go #1, you can make that bloated album. But if you really want people to care, I still think one of the best ways to do it is a short and sweet project. Hopefully we have a few more albums like that to talk about in the future. But let me know if I missed any. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe. This is HADJI. Peace.